Well, good morning and welcome to our event in cooperation with the Immigration Partnership of Waterloo Region. As we explore the future of immigration and its economic impact, not only in Waterloo Region but across Ontario. My name is Ian McLean and I'm the President and CEO of the Greater Kitchener-Waterloo Chamber of Commerce. And I want to thank you for your participation and attendance here this morning. And on behalf of Tara Bedard, the Executive Director of the Immigration Partnership of Waterloo Region, and her great team for helping to plan today's event in partnership with the Chamber. Before we begin, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge that we live and work on the traditional territory of the Neutral, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee peoples, as we seek a renewed relationship based on a foundation of mutual understanding and respect. As participants in today's event, we are coming together as one. We believe everyone is free to be their true self and receive the same respect and opportunity regardless of age, ethnicity, gender, culture, identity, sexual orientation, beliefs, or language. We hope you'll join us in fostering a positive environment here today to ensure a safe and welcoming space for all. As always with Chamber events, I'd like to take a moment to thank our partners and our sponsors of today's event. Without their support, this program and others like it would not be possible. So thank you to our title sponsor, the Immigration Partnership of Waterloo Region, our event sponsors, Serco Canada Inc., and the Workforce Planning Board of Waterloo, Wellington, Dufferin, and our production sponsor today, Goodco Productions. Please join me in thanking our incredible partners and sponsors. Now I'd like to ask Dr. Ernest Osei, Chair of the Immigration Partnership Council, on behalf of the Immigration Partnership, to join me and offer a few words of welcome. Dr. Osei.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. Over the last 15 years, the Immigration Partnership has brought together partners from our community, including businesses, immigrants, and community service organizations, employment services, healthcare, housing, English language training, post-secondary institutions, and municipalities. Together, we create a condition for immigrants to thrive, strengthening our economy and building a more inclusive, prosperous community for all. As a proud supporter of the Greater KW Chamber of Commerce, we recognize the critical role of businesses in driving economy and community development. Immigration and economic growth are deeply interconnected. When newcomers succeed, our entire community benefits. That is why we are pleased to co-host today's important discussion on fostering a community where everyone can thrive together. I also want to take a moment to highlight some of our valued partners in the room. A group we call Proponents, Champions for Immigrant Employment. This dedicated group include the YMCA Mentorship Program, the KW Multicultural Center Connector Program, Cambridge Community Association Employment Program, the Workforce Planning Board Workshop Immigrant Network, and the Reception House, Waterloo Region's Refugee Employment Program. Through our work pillar team, we collaborate closely with these partners to connect employers with immigrant talent, fostering networking opportunities and meaningful employment relationships. Their commitment to supporting both immigrants and employment is vital to our region success. I therefore encourage each and every one of you to visit their table today, learn more about their programs and explore how they can support you. Thank you to our partners for their dedication and to everyone here today for for being part of this important conversation. Together as a team, we are building a stronger and more inclusive society in the KW area. Thank you.
Just as we begin with the formal part of the program, I would like to recognize several of partners and champions that have supported the Immigration Partnership and the work that the community does to welcome newcomers to our community. Regional Chair Karen Redmond joins us today. Thank you for joining us. We also have the Chief Administrative, where is he? Matthew Getsky is here, right beside you. Glasses don't work. The Region of Waterloo's Chief Administrative Officer, and the Dean of the Business School at Wilfrid Laurier University. Where's Kyle? Kyle Murray, welcome, newcomer to our community. We're supported at the Chamber by, as the Immigration Partnership is, by a great council, but we have a great board of directors at the Greater KW Chamber of Commerce. Joining us from the board of directors this morning, Stephanie Soulis of Little Mushroom Catering. Welcome. Thank you for being here. And I would like to take a moment for those joining us on the live stream and virtually joining us today, welcome. Thank you for your participation and recognizing the importance of the discussion we have today. I have the pleasure of introducing today's first speaker, Charlene Hofbauer, is the Executive Director of the Workforce Planning Board of Waterloo, Wellington, Dufferin. We worked closely for, 14 years, I guess, on the, so from the time I've been at the Chamber, Charlene has been part of the working pillar of the Immigration Partnership of Waterloo Region. We had many years when we were trying to figure out how to make closer connections with workplaces and business, particularly small and medium-sized business, to make that connection. And we've, through trial and error and I wouldn't say wasted time, but we tried many things and we've settled on something that seems to really have some legs, and that's the Workplace Immigrant Network of Waterloo Region. I did get off a plane last night at 2 a.m., so I apologize in advance, but I'm pleased to be here. In any event, Charlene has worked in HR and education and literacy and spent 17 years in workforce development. Her goal is to build relationships with partners looking to find unique solutions for local labor market challenges and tackle some of the bigger ones that go beyond our region. Her greatest strength as a local leader is sharing research and trends in easy-to-understand pieces and connecting the dots for governments, schools, employers, students, and job seekers alike. Charlene will be talking about what is happening in the current workforce landscape in Waterloo Region to set a base for the conversations we're going to have in the upcoming year. So please join me in welcoming Charlene Hofbauer to the stage.
I've had slightly more sleep than Ian, but I am getting over a cold, so I'm going to do my best here. The first thing I want to talk about is the unemployment rate. So this is the stat that always gets reported. It's the most reported stat. It's the one you're going to hear. It's the one that sets everybody into terror, right? What's the unemployment rate? What's the unemployment rate? So kind of where are we at as Waterloo Region? So we started in January 2024. We are the green line. So a year ago, we were above Ontario's unemployment rate. And you'll see over the past year, we've kind of like switched position with Ontario a couple of times. But we're not too far off the Ontario unemployment rate, okay? And I just realized I should grab my notes so I don't miss anything. And right now, we're not too far above where we were a year ago. And actually, Ontario isn't as well. So we're about 1 base point off of where we were about a year ago. So although there's that terror reported of, oh my God, the unemployment rate, we're not so far off where we were a year ago. But I want to talk about some other rates that never get discussed. And I want to explain why those rates don't make me go crazy when I see the unemployment rate, okay? So the first one is, how is employment going? Again, we're the green line. The teal line's Ontario. We as Waterloo Region, so the KW, Cambridge, CMA, to be technical, our people are much more likely at 15 and above to be working than they are at the provincial level by about 5 basis points. So we do have a population that does work more in general than at the Ontario rate. In fact, sorry, I had to take my glasses off. We're the #1 CMA in Ontario when it comes to this rate, and only Saskatoon had a higher employment rate at the national level. So we're #2 in Canada when it comes to people 15 and over who are actually working. This is my favorite rate. It's participation. Participation tells me how engaged is our population 15 and above in working or looking for work. This is the big one. So again, we're the top line, Ontario's the bottom one, and you'll see that it's about 5 basis points difference. This is a big one because this kind of tells us how optimistic our population is about working and finding work. Okay. Again, in Ontario, we're #1. When it comes to CMA, we have one of the most engaged workforces in the province. And this is really important because we're at a time where some of our communities are sitting at 50% or less of their population working or looking for work. It's actually the CMA of Belleville, where they are 47% of their population, 15 and over, is working or looking for work. So the question, they have a lot of questions over there. Are they becoming a retirement community? What's going on? Are their youth giving up? But here in KW, we're finding that the population is willing to engage in work. And again, at the national level, I'm on the wrong one. At the national level, only Saskatoon and Calgary had higher rates at this point. So when it comes to an engaged workforce, we have one. We're very lucky to have one. Our neighbors just to the east of us in Guelph, they are they were #2 last month. I think they dropped to 3 or 4, and even Barrie has a decent rate. So when we look at our whole economic region of Kitchener, Waterloo, Barrie, which goes from Brampton to Midland, it's a little bit of there's an optimism in the region about working, about finding work, and our cities are doing well. This doesn't mean there's still problems. Don't think I'm trying to silver line this a little bit. There are still challenges in the workforce. We know that. If you work with youth, you know that they are having challenges right now. If you work with some other equity deserving groups, you know there are challenges. But as an overall picture, we do see that our population is engaging in work. So let me talk about some very specific things around our workforce. That was supposed to come up one at a time, but we have grown faster as a region than the province. 13% growth versus 10%, that's everybody. So we are a faster growing community, which doesn't surprise anyone if they've been to a Vision 1 million conversation with the Chamber. We're just growing much faster than the province. We also have a higher median income than the province by about $2,000. So people here do tend to make about $2,000 more than people across the province. One challenge that we've noticed, and this is coming from our local labor market plan, is we seem to be seeing the population 45 to 64 is starting to, when we look at who comes in and who goes out, we're starting to see a deficit. And we were like, okay, 45 to 64, all right, people are moving off, they're moving to other small towns. What we really don't know at this point, and we maybe need to explore, is those are our mentors for our middle managers. All right, so are they still in the region? Are they still working here? Have they moved on? What's going on in that population? So we're not putting a huge star on it, but we're watching this population to figure out if they're going to continue to be a resource for our developing talent. We also found, when we looked at the population from December 2023 to December 2024, is less of the population was female than it was a year ago. In that 25 to 44 group. And we have a little bit of a star on this one because right now the economic strategies, the attraction strategies that we're looking at really require some of our core industries to be strong. And those core industries are healthcare, education, and quality of life resources. And they are dominated by women. Employment is primarily women in those industries, and so if Waterloo Region is struggling to attract women, we may find bigger struggles in those industries. So we want to be really, really careful about how that number of women in the region changes. And how do we attract more of those 25 to 44 women? Because healthcare needs them, education needs them, and speaking as a nonprofit person, I need them too. So that is a workforce that we are very concerned about. And then you add in the struggle of childcare and all the other things. But we're just looking at population here. So we're not even looking at engaging women in that bracket. We're just looking at attracting them. I also want to point out the Canadian Survey on Disability came out last year, and so it was really hard to get local data, I'll be honest. Most of it's suppressed, but one thing we do know is that the Waterloo region has a higher rate of persons saying they have a disability than the national level. We're at 25%, the national level is 23%. And so I could pull some Ontario data. So 52% of people who report they have a disability have a post-secondary education. Often when we think about persons with disabilities, we think about moving them into entry-level positions. That's not the case. Most of them do have post-secondary background. They're looking for better opportunities. And so if you're an employer in the room or you work with employers, this is a good point to know. As well, we know that 25% of them identify also as a visible minority, and 28% report being an immigrant. So they don't always have the challenge of just having a disability. Now they may also have the challenge of they are new to the country, they are facing discrimination in the workplace. So when we start thinking about that, we can see why some of these groups may be having challenges getting into the workforce, or being aware that just because you can see one thing doesn't mean there aren't other things going on below the surface that may create challenges for people to engage in work. So this was really great data because it's really giving us a better perspective of what some of those co-challenges may be in some of our populations that we're trying to engage in work. We talk a lot about immigrants, so 25% of our population is an immigrant, and 27,800 came between 2016 and 2021. So that's pretty big. I think it was 6% of all the immigrants to Ontario over those years came to Waterloo region. So we are pulling that first group as much as we're pulling that second group who's relocating from the GTA. And finally, in that group, 65% of immigrants have a post-secondary educational attainment. So which is why the Workplace and Immigrant Network now exists, is because it's working with those professional immigrants to make sure that they're getting into those right jobs, because we know that the first 5 to 10 years for an immigrant will determine whether or not they stay in the community and the country. So we're really trying to make sure that that 65% of that immigrant population is finding work that is purposeful, that is aligning with their salary expectations, and it's aligning with the skill, most importantly, is aligning with the skills that they need and that they have. So that's kind of a picture, almost. What occupations do we work in? So I had to pull this data at the economic region level. The CMA level, it wasn't available when I went looking for it. But we do make up a big component of our economic region. So I do believe that the data is still relevant to Waterloo region. So most of us work in sales and service. That can be everything from manufacturing sales through to food and accommodation and retail, okay? Next is trades, transport, and equipment operators. Actually, last year when we did the local labor market plan, we found that we grew this category faster than the province did. I think we were at double-digit growth in this category in occupations versus the province that was like at 3 or 5%. So these are people who work in construction, manufacturing, they work in transportation and warehousing. Some of them may also work in potentially retail, because there's material handlers. Material handlers do a lot of different things. So this is a big group that has a lot of people working in it. Business, finance, and admin, that really doesn't surprise me. We're starting to grow a really decent insurance industry here in Waterloo region. It is a growing thing. Education, law, social, community, and government. We have 3 post-secondaries. This makes a lot of sense as well. 2 school boards, a number of private schools like St. John, Kilmarnock, and Rockway. So that's not super surprising either for most of us. And then those sort of occupations would be around. And then management. So a lot of people in our region are working in management. And actually, that's where the jobs grew the fastest in Waterloo region between 2020 and 2024. It was that occupational group grew by 50% in Waterloo region. So we saw a lot more managers being hired over this 5-year period than we saw of anything else. That was followed by education law, social government, natural applied sciences, driven by, even though our tech industries have a little bit of challenges, finance and manufacturing made that up. We saw so many software developers and programmers and engineers required in the automation space down in Cambridge and required in finance and insurance. So that's really been the driver if you've got that background where we're trying to encourage people with this tech background to really start exploring those spaces because they're still hiring at this point. And then arts, culture, recreation, and sports, which was probably COVID recovery, I'll be honest. That's probably why it came up there. Those sort of occupations were decimated in 2020, so some of that recovery has happened in those occupations. And then, because we do both sides of the coin, it only makes sense I talk to you a bit about where the business is. It's happening in our business landscape. So, in June 2024, because I haven't got the December data yet, we had about 61,000 businesses in Waterloo region. And that grew from December 2022 by 11%. Looking at my 3 different regions, I think this was the second fastest after Guelph Wellington. So we are seeing growth in businesses. I know there was some concern when there was discussion about small businesses having to repay their COVID payments and things like that, that it was going to make businesses fall. It's actually been the opposite. We've actually seen more businesses opening than we have before. 43,000 of those don't have employees. So if you are in that, how do I help small businesses grow? How do I help them get bigger? This is a big number. This is a lot of clients. And it is dominated usually by people who have very specialized skill sets. So our professional, scientific, and technical, that makes sense. Lawyers who own their own businesses, architects who own their own businesses, bookkeepers. And then it's those specialized services like real estate and construction tradespeople. A lot of construction tradespeople are one-stop shops. There's just one person and they do what they do. But there may be some potential for growth there. 62 of our businesses have more than 500 workers. And 500 workers is considered large, 500 and above. That's the StatsCan definition. We work very differently here when we talk about large businesses. Those are largely in manufacturing, education services, and healthcare. So not a huge surprise when we think about our landscape. 9,000 employ 1 to 4. And you can see those professional, scientific, technical, transportation, warehousing, construction, healthcare all have more than 1,000 businesses, and they make up a little over 50% of that 9,530. So it really, that small 1 to 4 people is really dominated by those 4 categories, those 4 industries. And finally, the last one, I was lucky enough to find data on labor market impact assessments. And a labor market impact assessment is needed if you are a business, and so I want to see you all, if you are a business and you want to bring in a temporary foreign worker. Okay, so you need to do one of these most of the time in order to get the okay from the government. So the first half of 2024, we had 429 that were approved in Waterloo region. And that was 809 temporary foreign workers that were approved. And so the October data just dropped a little while ago. I have it, so I haven't quite got Q3 yet. So that'll eventually be coming, and will probably become a tweet or some sort of social media post from our services. But the challenge now moving forward since November is that if you are one of the regions with more than 6% unemployment, you can no longer get a positive LMIA for low-wage occupations. So Waterloo region can no longer bring in people who make less than $34 an hour, because that's the cutoff point for high wage and low wage. So considering that most of low-wage jobs were in sales and service, which I just pointed out was the #1 occupation that we work in, this may be challenging for some employers moving forward, and they may have to look at other workforce groups to fill those gaps. So that is something we will be watching going forward, is like how many LMIAs are actually happening and how many positions is that turning into. And probably no surprise where we work. So #1, manufacturing this is economic region data again. No, this one's Waterloo region data, my apologies. So in Waterloo region, most of us are still working in manufacturing. followed by professional, scientific, and technical, which has actually risen over the years, much more than it has. Let me just say, because sometimes people think this means tech, this doesn't necessarily mean tech. Tech falls under many different industries, actually. But there are some tech companies would fall under professional, scientific, technical, others would fall under information and cultural, and D2L is an educational service. So it's not a nice, clean industry to pull data on. So, but professional, scientific, technical, most of those jobs and most of those industries do require some form of post-secondary education. Retail, and then healthcare, which has grown quite a bit since COVID, educational services, construction, and then there's that finance and industry. It's finally kind of making it really close to that top 5. And so where do we grow? Finance and industry grew the most between 2020 and 2024. Here we're back to economic region data. My apologies that I'm flipping back and forth. It's just how the data rolls out sometimes. And we're seeing that also professional, scientific, technical, and healthcare have really, really grown. So some of our big industries have really started to grow, and they're continuing to grow. They probably will continue to grow, especially healthcare. I can see that one growing, especially as we look towards a new hospital, knock on wood. And we see that population that is going to need those services increase. I'm almost done, I promise. So what I did was on February 20th, I pulled data from Find Your Job to give you guys a sense of, okay, what does employer demand look like right now? Our Find Your Job site pulls from 30 different job boards across Canada and regionally to pull jobs in Waterloo, Wellington, Dufferin. So it's live data changes all the time, so that's why I have to put a timestamp on it. So on February 20th, when I pulled data, there were 4,900 active job postings in Waterloo region. That's half of what it was last year. So we are seeing that employer demand drop. So we have a very, like I said, we have a very positive workforce that's willing to participate. We're starting to see some of that softening in online job postings in the past year. And employers are posting for fewer days. So last year it was 38 days because employers need to put it up to get people to come in the door, and now they've cut it in half to 15, which means that employers are probably being inundated with resumes and inquiries, and so they have actually cut their posting date so they can deal with the amount of applicants they get in and find an applicant within that pool. So it's not necessarily the best applicant, because maybe the best applicant would see that on day 16, and under last year, they would probably still get in, but this year, it's gotta be, you see it, you apply. We're back to that sort of model where we were, I would put about 2010, or 2020, my apologies, or 2019, sorry. Half the companies are hiring, so we're seeing that has dropped off as well. The top 5 skills in demand, we are finding in the past year that communication's been number 1. Communication is the biggest thing that employers ask for, and I'm gonna say that the data we get is only as good as the data that employers put into the job postings. So there may be other skills they're looking for, but they're not mentioning it in job postings. So if they don't get mentioned, you can't pull the data. So communication still being the biggest one. Shola, who's with our WIN program, she and I just did something over the Cambridge Chamber for manufacturers around communication. But there's a number, I'm seeing that skill set, those workshops pop up more and more and more and more. And it's the skill we use the most and we're the worst at. So it's one of those situations. And then you kind of see that management leadership. So I talked about management growth. We're starting to see those skill sets actually start to show up in the top 5. We've seen leadership over the past couple years, but management really starting to pop up is consistent. And where are we growing and declining the fastest? So this is a year over year. So our fastest growing occupations, software, whether it's a developer or an engineer, our healthcare represented with the home care worker and the registered nurses, and then in education, ECEs, which is not surprising to us because we've been exploring that space provincially and locally, and we know that that is a huge demand right now. Where are we seeing that decline? I'm going to say, when I talk about this decline, almost all of these jobs have been top 10 jobs for the past 5 years since Find Your Job launched. I think it's just a matter of there were so many postings and they're so cut now with the reduced numbers that's why they're showing up in our decline. But it's they're there as well, largely service, a lot of entry level short-term training where we're seeing that decline. So for anyone in the room who is supporting clients, this will be a struggle. The ones that are starred were our top 5 in-demand jobs in February. So software, registered nurses, retail, transportation truck drivers, and it was rounded out with food counter attendants. So we're seeing a lot of different types of demand in our workforce and from our employers, which is a good sign because that means that many different types of people can get work here. And so that's probably driving some of that optimism that I was talking about at the beginning when we were looking at the engagement and the participation levels of our people, is there's so many different types of opportunities because there's so many different types of business in Waterloo region versus some of our communities where we're seeing much less participation because it's a 1 or 2 industry town. And we're kind of lucky on that front. So with that, I want to thank you, and I'm going to let you guys take over on the conversation.
Well, thank you, Charlene, for joining us today and sharing the update. It's a reminder that each of us has a role to play in creating a meaningful impact. Charlene referenced Vision 1 Million. That's the shorthand for this, for us at the Chamber, that we're 700,000 people in the region of Waterloo. We'll be 1 million people, and you can pick your date, but 20 years, 25, I don't think it really matters. We're going to have 300,000 more people here within 25 years or less. Lots of work to do on healthcare, housing, transit, infrastructure, jobs, neighborhoods, and communities. The issue is for everyone, including newcomers to our community. And on that new employment in Canada, in Ontario, in Waterloo region, almost all of it will come from newcomers to Canada. So let that sink in. The workforce of the future is going to be new to our country, and we better be prepared that for them to come here and be a success, personally and professionally. And so for 20 years, our region has come together to support immigrant success, recognizing it as both an economic and community development priority. Attraction and retention are key, alongside critical factors like jobs, income levels, housing, health and mental health care, language training, and settlement supports. And as we continue this conversation, let's explore how we can further strengthen the infrastructure that helps newcomers and our broader community thrive. So the work continues. There's more to do, particularly in the global political context we find ourselves in. And with that in mind, I am thrilled to introduce our next guest. And please join me in welcoming Dan Tish, President and CEO of the Ontario Chamber of Commerce. He is, and Karen Redmond, I once said, I referred to someone as an old friend. She said, never say that, say they're a dear friend. So a dear friend, Dan Tish, I was not working in federal politics, but he was when my dad was in federal politics. It goes back a long, long way. Joe Clark, Brian Mulroney, and all of that era. So I've known Dan for a long time, but he's a business, public policy, and community leader, having held executive roles in government and the corporate sector, and senior governance roles at public institutions and nonprofit associations. He's known globally as an expert in corporate communications, public policy, community engagement, crisis and reputation management. And from 2003 to 2023, Daniel was a driving force behind building Argyle Communications into Canada's largest management-owned engagement, communication, and reputation advisory firm, growing to over $38 million in revenue, having had 155 employees and 10 North American offices. Earlier in his career, Daniel has held senior communications roles in the Canadian government, including serving as senior policy advisor and acting chief of staff to Canada's Minister of Foreign Affairs. Daniel has spoken to business audiences on every continent, lectured at Queen's University Smith School of Business since 1996, and contributed to leading public relations and marketing textbooks. He appears regularly in print and broadcast media, including weekly commentary on CBC Radio and Global News. Daniel was named one of the world's top 100 social media influencers on public relations. Born in Spain to a Latin American family and raised in Toronto, Daniel speaks English, French, and Spanish. He holds 2 degrees from Queen's University. He is a certified corporate director with an ICD designation in corporate governance from the University of Toronto, and has served as vice chair of the Queen's University Board of Trustees. And in his spare time, he comes to join us here in Waterloo Region. Please join me in welcoming Dan Tisch to the stage. He'll make some opening remarks, and then join me between the ferns.
Well, thank you so much, Ian, and what an inspiring morning this has been already. And I really want to congratulate you, Ian, and also Tara and Charlene and Karen as the regional chair for this partnership, and everybody else who's been involved. I know I'm only citing a few people that I happen to have met, but it is inspiring to see business and government and the nonprofit sectors come together in a community to achieve positive change on issues that matter so much. And the topic that we're discussing today, it's actually very personally meaningful for me, because my family story is also an immigrant story and a refugee story. My father was it's not in the bio, is my father was a Jewish refugee from the Holocaust. In 1939, 1940, they tried to find a country that would take them. I'm not proud to say that at the time Canada said no, but they made their way to Latin America, where my father grew up speaking Spanish, met my mother. They left Latin America when their country, Uruguay, was about to slide into dictatorship. They went to Spain, where I was born, under another dictatorship, right? And the reason they left Spain is because they did not want their eldest son to go into military service. So I'm kind of grateful for that, right? And so we came here, and this was a place where we could achieve our dreams. And so I'm profoundly grateful, but all my life, having my parents not having come here they came with very little money and made a life for us and for themselves. I've always thought about the role of immigration and about the role of diversity, the role of inclusion, and the idea of inclusive prosperity, and those have been things that have motivated me throughout my career. And so I guess to pivot to our Ontario Economic Report and some of the findings which I want to share with you to set up the conversation that Ian and I are going to have. Let me just see, do I click this way? There we go. Yes, so I found myself in Washington a couple of weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, with Canada's premiers, as we went around and met with U.S. obviously the politicians met with politicians, business people like me, we met with business people. And, and I was reflecting at the time just on, again, that choice my parents made. My parents could just as easily have gone to the U.S. In fact, my mother had worked at the American Embassy in Montevideo. My father had done post-grad work at MIT, and so he was a very skilled immigrant. And so the U.S. was the natural destination. But in the end, the reason my parents chose Canada was because of chance, because my father was going to a job and the client that he was visiting happened to be right beside the Canadian Embassy. So he went in and he had an interview and led to the process, and it went from there. And I look at what's happening in the U.S. right now and the way Canada and the U.S. have diverged in so many ways, and it's troubling. And of course, there's never been in my lifetime a more challenging time in terms of our relationship with the United States and the threat it poses to our economy and to our democracy and to our society than we have right now. And so as I woke up the day after those meetings in Washington, D.C., I took an Uber to the airport. From the lounge, I joined an update call with the leaders of our 150 local chambers across Ontario. I think, were you on the call, Ian? I think you were, yes. And we talked a little bit about what was going on. We try to communicate often. And then I get on the plane, and I'm there with other Ontarians who've been on the mission. And people share their reflections. And as we take off, I'm reflecting on all these conversations, not just in the preceding 36 hours, but in the last 6 weeks. And, of course I felt some anxiety, who wouldn't, right? But I also felt some optimism, because there's never been I've never seen a time like this, right? I mean, I've never seen more urgency or more energy in our business community around issues that are bigger than any one business, right? Around wanting to be involved in bigger questions that can make our province and our country better. I've never seen political leaders more responsive to what we have to say, and I've never seen a greater determination to turn talk into action. Now, will it turn into action? I don't know, but I'm more optimistic than I have been in a long time because we have been united by this external threat. And if there's one thing that, one thing that I've heard, we all woke up on Groundhog Day weekend with the tariff threat, right? And then the day after Groundhog Day, there was the fateful conversation between our Prime Minister and the US President, and we were told, through the media, that the tariff threat had been delayed by 30 days, right? But this external threat has united Canadians in a way that I've rarely seen in many, many years. And if there's one thing I've heard from business leaders and chamber leaders across Ontario, it's that we don't want to be in this situation again. We don't want to wake up to another Groundhog Day, and we have to take charge of our own destiny. And it starts, as Charlene's presentation reminds us, it starts with data, right? And understanding where we are now. And so let me give you a bit of a glimpse into Ontario business confidence as we learn from the survey that we just did, which we released last week. So you see here the big numbers, right? The business confidence in Ontario, this was done in December, okay? So it's not super high, right? It's 26%. We're confident in the Ontario economy, 26% of businesses in our survey. And while that's not high by historical standards, it's double what it was a year earlier. So that's a good thing, right? Driven by consumer demand, by technological innovation, and by improved inflation, right? But here's the problem. Oh, sorry, one more thing. The other point is that businesses are confident in themselves. And this is actually even more interesting, right? Because you ask businesses, are you confident in the economy? 26% say yes. But you ask them, are you confident in yourselves and your own prospects? And do you think you're going to grow this year? 49% say yes, right? So that is really an interesting finding because business confidence really matters. It drives investment decisions. It drives employment decisions, right? It drives so many things. But here's the problem. This is a survey we did just 2 weeks ago. We did this the week after that fateful phone call between the President and the Prime Minister. So between February 4th and February 10th, we went back into the field with Léger and we asked Ontario businesses, well, okay, in the context of this tariff threat, where's your confidence? It drops to 15%. So all the gains that we made in the last year, almost entirely gone if tariffs are on the table. That's not good. Now, you ask, this is back to the main survey, and I'll come back to the tariffs. You ask about confidence by business size. Well, this isn't surprising. We saw this last year too. Large businesses are more confident than small businesses or mid-sized business. Sorry, large and mid-sized businesses are more confident than small businesses. Confidence by sector. Again, so it wasn't really surprising to us, but the cultural industries, retail, nonprofits, the lowest levels of confidence, right? And it's not hard to imagine why if you think of the various factors facing these sectors today. More confident sectors, the most confident, like 56%. Like again, the average is 26, so mining 56%, finance, insurance, administrative support, right? So you see areas where there are pockets of greater confidence. I thought this might be interesting, just confidence by region. And you see Kitchener-Waterloo, I'm not sure why Barrie's in there, but I guess it's wherever the map was drawn for the purpose of this. No one knows. No one knows, exactly. So, so a little bit lower than the norm in the province, but not a huge amount of variation, right? So gaps and opportunities. I thought this would be interesting. Just a few facts for you, right? So you ask businesses, and one of my later slides will tell you, what are businesses most interested in, right? And so health, 20% say they're impacted by the opioid crisis. 33% by limited access to family doctors. There's a mental health action group. 71% say mental health is really important to my workforce, but only 41% have plans and strategies to act on it. So that's what we call the action gap. DEI. very relevant to our conversation today, I'm sure we'll talk about it in a few minutes, Ian, and Indigenous reconciliation. So interestingly, 2% drop in priority, right, in terms of is this a priority for your business? Maybe not surprising given, the economics that we're facing today, but a 5% increase in actually having a DEI strategy. And I find that very interesting in light of what's going on south of the border. Reconciliation. Charlene and I were talking about this briefly before we started. 41% of businesses have taken no action whatsoever. 30%, the biggest action, land acknowledgements, right? And very little beyond that, right? But what's the biggest reason? They don't know where to start. And so again, here's an opportunity, right? There's so many opportunities in this. In climate, right? There's been a very tiny drop in businesses with emissions reduction goals, but some sectors are over-indexing and they're doing great work: mining, labor, utilities, agriculture. Key opportunities. You ask businesses when it comes to climate, what are the two biggest things we can do? Energy efficiency and waste management, right? Help them with that. Some good news on tech and AI, which is, I know, very important to this region, right? 78% of businesses report implementing technology in the last year, 66%, higher than I would have thought, actually using AI and the barriers, uncertainty. I don't have time to do it. I don't have capacity to do it. I don't know if I need it. Labor shortages. This is important. This is not StatsCan data. This is self-reported, obviously, so take it with a grain of salt. But you saw, this is encouraging, I suppose, a drop in businesses reporting labor shortages either for themselves or within their sectors, right? And you see some of the sectors where there are greater needs, mining, ag, forestry, construction, accommodation, food service, transportation. So fundamentally, we've got a tale of two tomorrows, right? One with tariffs, one without tariffs. And, you ask businesses, what do you think about this tariff threat, right? 67% believe it'll hurt them, right? And that's obviously not good, right? You ask them, sorry, what was that? Sorry, anticipate the negative impact. Yeah. So that's the same data. And then, but then you ask them again, are you confident in your ability to adapt? And the number, it's more encouraging. So maybe this is the same group, I don't know, but same number, 48% say, yeah, I'm confident, we're gonna get through this. But here's the challenge that we all face, in this economy right now. You ask businesses, why are you confident? How are you going to adapt? Well, what are their strategies? Number one, we're gonna raise our prices. Number two, we're gonna diversify our suppliers. Number three, we're going to lay off workers. Right? Now, two of those things are really not good news, are they? Right? So we've got to take that very seriously. And I guess finally I want to just sort of highlight business policy priorities. And Ian, you and I can go deeper into this, but it's not surprising. Taxes are always number one. You ask businesses, what's your biggest public policy priority? Well, taxes, right? But it's interesting, in my view, to see numbers 2, 3, and 4. And here there's a zone of opportunity for all of us, right? Number 2, it's where are we going to house our workers, right? Affordable housing. Number 3, it's healthcare system capacity. Will my team, will my people have access to a family doctor, right? And number 4, investing in workforce development. And that speaks to the role of this partnership, that speaks to the role of our post-secondary institutions and actually funding them properly for the first time in generations. And it speaks to the possibilities and the potential of partnerships that we can build together. So to wrap up my opening thoughts, the game has changed, right? And Canadians are more united. We're more competitive, or we want to be more competitive, but we're not there yet. We've got so much to do, even as we stand determined to defend our democracy and safeguard our sovereignty. There's a gap, right, in terms of our productivity, in terms of some of the complacency which we've fallen into in recent generations, right? And I think there's an opportunity now to replace complacency with competitiveness, to replace dependence on one foreign market with diversification. And part of diversification, of course, is ensuring that we make diversity our competitive advantage, and I know that's what we're going to talk about today. So I'm optimistic, even though I'm still a little anxious, but I really believe that when all is uncertain, everything becomes possible. So thank you for listening, and I look forward to the conversation.
There we go. Well, thanks, Dan, and I know you've got a slight injury. I think that came from cheering for the for Team Canada and a celebratory scrum. So, but thank you for being here today and joining us on Between the Ferns. I don't know if you noticed our, for those that know the show.
I like it. I like it.
It's a good look.
Between the Ferns, I think that's got some legs.
Yeah, it does. I'm not as funny as the other guy that does that show. Listen, Charlene gave us more of the regional and the local perspective. The OCC and in some of your data from the Ontario Economic Report gives us more of a provincial and global context about what's driving the economy, and I guess that's our starting point. You've shared some of the Ontario Chamber's research into business priorities. What are the biggest advocacy priorities for the Ontario Chamber in 2025? We're in the midst of a provincial election. That's going to come and go on Thursday. Where do labor and skills, because that's the focus today, but it's not divorced from the political considerations in the province and in the country, and certainly, as you've shown there, the global context and Trump and tariffs.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'd encourage you, obviously, if you Google Ontario Chamber of Commerce, Ontario Economic Report, you can see the full report from which I drew this presentation. But I'd also encourage you to look at a document called Ontario Competes, which again, you can Google Ontario Competes. That is our provincial election platform, which we released on day one of the election. And it's got 4 pillars, right? And so we got a lot of areas of advocacy. Ian knows this because in our chamber network, we have an annual conference in every April, late April, and chambers from all over Ontario, they vote, and we pass resolutions, kind of like a political party without the elections, and without the partisanship, But we have this policy compendium, but we then elevate certain things which we believe there's an opportunity they're particularly relevant to business right now and workers and communities. And also there's an opportunity we feel for influence, right, on these themes. And so, the big 4, a competitive business and trade environment is one. These are not in any particular order, but if you look at the areas where we're focused, what can we do to become more competitive? So, for example, you see things there like reducing interprovincial trade barriers, right? And so one thing that we were able to do this year as the Ontario Chamber is we prepared a letter to the provincial premiers, not just our premier, but every premier, and we got all of the other provincial CEOs to sign, and it took a little bit of negotiation, but in the end we all agreed on a set of recommendations that we would jointly make to the provincial premiers to bring down these destructive barriers, which affect what we're talking about today, because obviously they affect labor mobility. I mean, wouldn't it be great to be in a situation where talent could go anywhere in Canada, and credentials would be recognized wherever they needed to be, and how beneficial that could be, not just for the workers, but for the local communities everywhere. So that's an example, competitive business environment. Second one, qualified people and diverse talent, right? And so there we look at, addressing labor and skill shortages. We look at issues, such as provincial immigrant nominee programs. We look at colleges and universities and the fact that we urgently need investment in our colleges and universities, right? I was on the board of Queen's for 10 years, and you look even in recent years, right? Ontario universities now they're funding it per student, I believe, is 57% of the national average, right? That's a disgrace. We need to do better than that, right? And this isn't a partisan thing, all parties have been in government in the last generation, and, but whoever's elected this Thursday, I think has an historic opportunity to fix this challenge. I really do. And the same with colleges. Colleges have a structural deficit of $1 billion now in Ontario, so it's just colleges and universities. Third pillar, healthy and sustainable communities. And so that's looking at, primary care reform. That's looking at connecting Ontarians to family doctors. That's looking at mental health, addictions, opioids, right? All of these things affect businesses. Businesses are on the front lines. And finally, there's infrastructure, right? Growth enabling infrastructure. So that's energy, that's broadband, that's electricity, that's transportation, transit, right? These building blocks of competitiveness. And when you put all these together, labor and skills run through everything, right? We're not going to build that infrastructure. We're not going to have that competitive business environment. We're not going to have healthy and sustainable communities unless we are integrating newcomers in a way that's effective and ensuring that we are developing the skilled workforce that we need.
So, I mean, one of the things you see is immigration and, newcomers coming to the country. It's a hot button issue, particularly in the U.S. There's some elements of it here as the economy softens. But I want to kind of pivot the question a little bit about immigration is still in Canada's long-term, not just interest, it's a necessity. We won't be able to fill the jobs of the future without immigration and newcomers coming to Waterloo Region, Ontario, and Canada. But I want to connect it to the trade, the Trump and tariffs issue, because what you've just talked about, those are the priorities which I think, my 14 years at the Chamber, to some extent they haven't really changed. I mean, we've made some progress on some others, but those are the general priorities of saying you got to have those strong foundations in order to be successful.
Yes, the individual policies are those priorities have changed, but you're right. Those pillars, if you have to ask anyone, you put people in a room and you say, what are the fundamentals of a competitive, inclusive society? You probably end up with those.
You're going to end up with that list, but I want to go. I mean, as we talk about the external threat, and what I found interesting is you talked about Groundhog Day. He announces the tariffs on a Friday night, and Friday and Saturday and Sunday, everyone's like, yeah, we're going to do interprovincial trade barriers because we know that we can create jobs and we can be more productive. We're going to do tax reform because we haven't done tax reform in over a generation. Mm-hmm. We're going to build pipelines, and everyone gets on board and says, geez, we should get have more places to sell our goods. And you know when that ended? Monday at 4 o'clock when we got a 30-day reprieve, and suddenly as if the problem had gone away. Are those key pieces, because those are key big priorities that will take intestinal fortitude, political strength, investment. It's relevant here because what we've discovered is we can't rely on the U.S. in the same way that we thought we could in the past. And our economic future has to be disentangled, and we have to be looking more to the country. So it connects to immigrants and it connects to our workforce of the future. Are those priorities? How should we see those on a local level here of the importance of interprovincial trade barriers, building pipelines to Tidewater, doing meaningful tax reform, both personally and corporately, which will drive our economy?
Yeah, well, look, I think that I actually think that the single biggest reason that we get, I alluded to how quickly we're getting phone calls returned, for instance, right? Like generally we've never had an issue in getting the ear of government, right? Now that doesn't mean they're going to heed us, right? Listening and learning and heeding are different things, right? But they always listen to us. But the difference, Ian, since the year it began is, I sent the Premier a text the day before that phone call, right? February 2nd, actually. Yep. And, he calls me in like 15 minutes, right? And I say, we've set up this Ontario Business and Trade Leadership Coalition. Would you speak to the coalition? You're going to Washington next week. And the coalition includes leaders from every major trade-sensitive sector in the province, right? So you've got mining and forestry and agriculture and manufacturing and it goes on and on and on. And so he says, absolutely, right? That meeting happened 24 hours later, 24 hours later. The day that the premiers came to their deal on, not their deal, but they agreed to pursue interprovincial trade as an immediate high priority. Anita Anand is the federal internal trade minister. So I hear that, the meeting wrapped up, the premier's meeting wraps up at about 5. The news, I hear the news of what they've announced. I texted her, she calls me in 15 minutes, and I say, I'd like you to meet with our members. The meeting happened like a week later, right? Like, so the speed is really interesting, right? And so again, this is different parties, different levels of government. But let me tell you why that happens. That doesn't happen because I'm anybody important. That doesn't happen because we're the Ontario Chamber. It happens because we have 150 local chambers. It happens because each of these chambers has some, individually has some political sway by representing every community in the province. It comes because we have municipal leaders who are working with chambers, and there was a delegation the same day we were there in Washington. There was Josh Morgan from London was there, representing the big city mayors, and so it's all of us acting together and leveraging that local connection, which is so very important. That's ultimately how change happens.
So the Ontario Chamber, we talked about the Ontario Economic Report, the approach to immigration and skilled workforce of the future. Charlene gave some of the local context of that, or the priority, or the jobs of the future here: tech, advanced manufacturing, most of which are more highly skilled jobs. Yep. There's that's what manufacturing is right now. In the context of, business leaders, we talk about it, recruiting and retaining talent. How do we attract the right employees? And maybe this is part of an immigration system problem of not having boutique things like the provincial nominee program for a few of the jobs that might satisfy in the short term. But how do we do this in the long term of saying, we need to welcome people here, but don't we have to put more focus on economic immigration, of getting the right people in here? We have many here, but we've got to be more focused on that for our immediate future.
Yeah, for sure. Again, I reflected on my parents' experience, right? Back in those days, you'd have it would all be focused on a single interview, right? And the system, if I believe, some people here may correct me if I'm wrong about this, but I believe the system was at the time prioritizing permanent residents on a path to citizenship who would bring their families here. And in some ways, I think that's what we have to get back to, right? Because if the skills-based immigration system, that leads to permanent residency and ultimately citizenship, if that were working well and working efficiently, we wouldn't see people using all these other entry points, to temporary admission, right? You wouldn't see the same level of asylum claims. You wouldn't see the same level of, temporary workers, trying to come here. You wouldn't see the same level of students, students, coming, right? So there are all these interconnected problems. So systemically, we've got to figure out what the priority is. And I am actually gravely worried about the prospect next year of a 20% reduction in permanent residents entering permanent residents, resident immigrants coming into Canada, right? Like we don't have too many tools to deal with our aging population, right? You've got 1 in 5 workers who are going to retire by 2030. And so how do we maintain the standard of living that we have right now? There are really 4 choices, right? You can raise taxes, which no government wants to do. You can go deeper into debt. Well, our debt to GDP ratio in Ontario is, is close to 40%. It's down a little bit in recent years, but it's still historically at a very high number. We don't have that much room to take on more debt. There's productivity, but that's not going in the right direction. That's something we got to work on. And there's immigration. So those are the only, I can't think of any other lever, right? So, immigration has to be a foundation of our future. Then the other piece is, the employer level, right? So, why is it difficult for newcomers to integrate? Well, there's credential barriers, right, which we need to get at. There's lack of Canadian experience, and there's employer hiring practices. Like, I think those, again, to me, those are the big three. And so, again, the work you're doing to work with employers, to equip employers with the right resources, the right skills, that I think is so very fundamental. Again, Charlene and I were talking about this. When my business was small, we couldn't afford HR, right? And so the ability to tap into external partners who can provide advice and guidance. How do you build an inclusive workforce, a welcoming workforce? How do you look at not just compensation, but look at growth opportunities, look at inclusion, look at quality of life issues, right? Look at mental health. Those are important things that employers need guidance in order to achieve. So I think it's all of this. It's the systemic and policy issues, but it's also employer-specific challenges.
So I want to touch on foreign credentials. Our chamber for a better part of 25 years has worked on family physician recruitment. It's been an issue here long before it became a provincial, national, frankly, an international, certainly a North American challenge. We see far too many professionals, whether it's engineers or doctors or skilled professionals across the board, that are, it's probably more likely they're driving a cab in Toronto, but doing something that it does not reflect the skills that they have. And, we talk about, and so this question was specifically going to be about healthcare, because I think it does drive, people won't come unless they have a place to live, they can educate their kids, and that they have healthcare. And a job is closely associated to that, which is connected to it. So we can leave it with healthcare being important, but maybe the real question is, as you talk about newcomers being the source of how we can continue our economic prosperity here in Canada, foreign credentials is one of those things that there has to be a solution to. Is interprovincial trade, to go back to that, if we can do something on interprovincial trade barriers, I have more confidence than I've ever had before that we can get foreign credentials, because labor mobility would say the engineer who's a P-Eng in Ontario should be licensed in Alberta or Nunavut, just like doctors would. So is that foreign credentials issue, are we going to see some success in the interprovincial trade barriers and in a strange way, Trump is giving us an opportunity as a country to do some of the things we should have done 30 years ago.
Absolutely.
And we have not done. Is that an opportunity to
huge opportunity. Yeah, it's a huge opportunity. And so again, in my job, I kind of have to be an optimist, right? And just to remember that, perfection is not the enemy of progress, right? It can take a long time to move the ball down the field. But I think the chances I don't think even the chances, I think without question, even since 2025 began, we've started to move the ball down the field on interprovincial trade, right? And look at Nova Scotia. Nova Scotia just announced what we've been suggesting Ontario do for quite some time. And that's, well, not quite actually. We were suggesting Ontario should unilaterally recognize credentials, that are recognized in other provinces, right? And so Nova Scotia is saying it's sort of a reciprocity thing, saying, others like, if I understand it, is others who recognize our credentials will recognize yours, right? And so that level of leadership, I think, is super important. And so, yeah, I am optimistic about that. And the other thing that makes me optimistic, again, I referred to my years on university board before, we saw such an uptick in international talent, like the very best people, especially in the research fields, wanted to come to Canada, during the first Trump administration. And so it's kind of funny because, you see this unbelievably short-sighted, foolish backlash against diversity, equity, and inclusion in the United States, like to a point that is, I hope the camera is not rolling crazy. You know what I mean? And I just mean, not only is it despicable, it's just foolish. There was a great piece in the New York Times last week about where there was an economist who was saying, the iPhone, in order to make an iPhone, you need resources from 50 countries. 50, right? We're no longer in a world of national economies. We're in a world of innovation ecosystems. And in order to be effective, a society needs to be able to partner with talent, no matter where they are from around the world. And so everyone who thinks, oh, well, they're going to cut taxes in the U.S., there's going to be a big economic advantage. Oh, he's putting tariff walls up, so there's going to be all this new investment in the U.S. Are you kidding me? Right? If you're repelling the best and brightest people, why would you get more investment in your country? Now, we'll see what happens, obviously, as he likes to say, we'll see what happens, right? But it's, I actually think Canada's got an enormous opportunity, an enormous advantage if we can actually practice what we preach when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Just so you know, my staff have lots of experience with bleeping out swear words, and I'll just leave it at that. The Conference Board of Canada reported in a recent presentation at WLU's School of Business, and since Dean Murray is here, I thought I would throw this in here, that while the job market is declining, and we saw some of those numbers from Charlene. But there's still lots of jobs, and I guess the question is, if for immigrant job seekers, and we hear this at the work, certainly at the pillar that I chair and have for 14 years, that there's always a bit of a mismatch between willing, capable newcomers and immigrants and to our community and the jobs that are available. Is it that there's lots of jobs, but is there a mismatch in the skills, or are we back to our credentials being recognized and people being screened out? What's the Chamber's view from a provincial perspective? Because this is not unique to us. I mean, we have these same conversations when I'm talking with other of my colleagues, whether we're in Timmins at the OCC conference or at the Canadian Chamber. These are common things across certainly the province of Ontario.
Yeah, and I think, one thing that I'm very proud that we were involved in is, we partnered, for example, with the Northern Ontario Chambers, right, to urge the expansion of the Ontario Immigrant Nominee Program for Northern Ontario. So that's, sending 3,000 nominations annually to help skilled immigrants establish themselves in the region. And I think those sorts of regional, and then there are regional pilots happening, right? One affecting Thunder Bay, I think Sarnia. There are two in Eastern Ontario, and I think this sort of direction is a really positive direction. And if anything, I think the advantage of using the provincial nominee programs is that you've got they're much closer to the ground than the federal government is, and each province can make judgment calls based on data that look at workforce needs, not just by sector but also by region. So I think we've got a real opportunity there to, again, to use the same metaphor, to move the ball down the field.
Now, you mentioned Northern Ontario. I mean, we have Woolwich makes us greater. That's why we're Greater KW Chambers, Woolwich Township. But it's always a little bit of a joke for me. But agriculture is probably our, if you include food processing, is our number one employer in Waterloo region, which I don't think a lot of people know. So
I didn't know that.
So agriculture, prime agriculture, food processing, when you do all of the things associated with it is an important issue for us locally here. But as you think about northern communities, those that are more rural, which would probably have more agriculture connected to them, or mining for that matter, which is an advantage for Ontario. Those specific areas have recruiting for challenges for immigrants, because they may not have the infrastructure in smaller communities that you need when you're bringing in newcomers into a community. Language services, healthcare, housing, and you are back to the Vision 1 million things, which is, do you have the right pieces in place to be able to welcome them get them a job and have them be successful.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. And it's interesting you mentioned mining. I mean, the Ontario Chamber we just set up a new mining council, right? So we have a lot of the work we do at the policy level, it flows through our policy councils, which bring together, generally larger employers, but also other stakeholder groups, multi-stakeholder tables around infrastructure, energy, workforce development, and health. Those are our four big ongoing policy councils. But the one we've added starting in January is mining. And it was very instructive, Ian, just going to the first meeting in January, where we had mining stakeholders, many different people around the table from all over the province, but obviously tended to be more focused on Northern Ontario. And we saw some interesting data just about how difficult it is to attract skilled labor, to attract skilled immigrants to go work in mining, right? And so there are a whole basket of issues. There's one, the perception of mining careers was not great, right? So a lot of skilled immigrants going into other areas like, aerospace, for instance, like and so here you have a sector where there's huge need and huge opportunity, but not a lot of people going into it. So why is that? So part of it is marketing, but then there's also the building blocks of a welcoming community, right? And a community that can integrate people, right? So challenges that we heard about, older housing stock, right? Healthcare deficits, right? The wait times at hospitals in rural and remote communities are just much longer, and even getting to the hospital is a challenge. Schools, the level of educational attainment at those schools was not as high, and so obviously you bring your family to Canada. You now you can look and okay, well, what's the level of attainment at all these schools, and if you don't see good numbers, you're not going to be encouraged to move there. Lack of broadband access, right? So there are all these building blocks that we need to tackle together in order to assess how effective a strategy is going to be at welcoming the talent that we need, right? So we got to look at all those pieces.
Okay, we're getting close to our time, so I got one more question, then I'm going to do a couple rapid fire to finish off. We come from a part of the province with two world-class universities and a community college that are providing some of the most talented graduates in the country, for sure, and globally. Post-secondary institutions are essential partners in working with business, whether it's on co-ops, whether it's on experiential learning opportunities for their students to be ready for the workforce. We know there are newcomers to this community will go, whether it's foreign students or those that are here upgrading their skills. So as we think about, and you touched on this earlier, but I want to kind of connect it to the specifics of newcomers coming here, making sure they have the skills, because continuous learning has to be a thing too in today's economy. And so supporting immigrants as they integrate into Ontario, the essential nature of community colleges for upgrade, but also the universities for the skills and the professional designations that are going to be required. How do we connect that? Because I think it is important. I'm on the University of Toronto board. Funding is a thing for every post-secondary, and it has been, as you say, for it's not 10 years, it's like 30 years. It's certainly 20 plus years.
Yeah.
So, there's got to be an advocacy piece saying, hey, we're not just talking for universities and community college, but for what it means for business, for small businesses to be able to have the partner at Laurier or Waterloo or Conestoga College to be able to make those connections between newcomers, the jobs that we have to fill as businesses, and making that connection.
Yeah, for sure. And, my schooling on this, I think I already had a sense of university finance and economics from those days, but I started this job on January 15th, 2024, right? 13 months ago. And the week I started was the week that the federal government did the dramatic cutback in foreign study permits. And so, oh God, where did this come from, right? The lack of consultation, the lack of dialogue, was very, very concerning. But that was, I forget what day it was. I think that might have been the Monday. The Wednesday, we had our biweekly meeting with all of our chamber leaders from across Ontario, including Ian. And I was amazed, and I wasn't prepared for this, by how much this mattered to every chamber leader in Ontario, right? Because what they were saying to us is, you've got to push hard on this, you've got to advocate on this, because this is going to cause a crisis in our local community. These students are essential to our economies. They are, essential to the workforce of the future. This is really going to damage us, right? And so that was interesting to me, because it reinforced what I later heard from both Colleges Ontario and the Council of Ontario Universities, and we have a lot of universities. In fact, the majority of Ontario universities and colleges are members of the Ontario Chamber, right? As well as COU and Colleges Ontario. And what they are all saying is, we so value when business speaks out about the sustainability of university and college finances in Ontario. And that's why we've been very aggressive, right? Last week, we put out a few pieces in the Ontario election. On Friday, if you look at our site again, we put out a piece specifically on post-secondary education. And the point we made is that not necessarily now, because it's not realistic, but in the future, Ontario should set a goal of having the best funded per student post-secondary education system in Canada, not the worst. Right now, we're bottom of the list. And yet, our political leaders, when they go to open a plant or speak to a group somewhere, they're always saying, our greatest competitive advantage is our talent. Well, how are we going to keep that as our greatest competitive advantage if we're not investing in the future? The other thing I'll say is the irony of a situation where we are talking right now as a society about spending billions of dollars to subsidize businesses and workers who might be affected by U.S. tariffs. And that's fine. I'm not arguing with the importance of doing that. But how bizarre it would be that if we spend billions subsidizing the present while neglecting the future, right? And that's why university funding matters so very much. And when we get to the issues that we're talking about here, part of the issue, I think, is that I don't think government understands the incredible progress universities and colleges have made in actually building connections with employers and graduating, people who are ready for the workforce. I think work-integrated learning has been quite transformational, and colleges have always been good at this, but now universities have gotten really good at it, right? And of course, University of Waterloo has always been, a leader in this area and known for that, right? But if you look at across the system, right, there are so many great stories about work-integrated learning and how valuable that is for the employer and the worker, right, and everybody involved. And then the final thing I'll say quickly is, I think when it comes to integrating newcomers, universities and colleges have an absolutely essential role, right? And we have to recognize that even though we've got all these different categories of newcomers coming to Canada, in some ways the distinctions are a bit artificial, right? Like you say, okay, well, we've got asylum seekers, refugees, we've got, temporary workers, we've got skilled workers, like on the permanent residency pathway. Okay, but ultimately almost everybody, not almost everybody, but in multiple categories, they're going to need education. They're going to need to go to school. They're going to need reskilling. And so again, universities and colleges will be training and preparing a lot of these people for the workforce, plus giving them the supports they need to integrate into the community. Coming here as a refugee does not mean you're not coming here with marketable skills. The majority of refugees are coming here with highly marketable skills. But they may need to go to school to upgrade those skills, or they may need to do some education, to have their credentials elevated and validated, right? So in all these areas, I think the role of post-secondary education is fundamental.
Once again, I've failed miserably in getting us out on time, so we have about 3 minutes, but I'm going to do 2 rapid-fire questions, just mostly to kind of leave a couple of thoughts in people's minds. And the one that struck mine, I want to come back to, and, I hate saying his name, but anyway, the President of the United States, trade and tariffs, is the isolationist America First mentality that's in place now and likely to be for some period of time. We've already agreed it's an opportunity for Canada, for other countries that are tolerant, export-driven economies that have labor needs. How can business help in amplifying the importance of that? I mean, we do that locally. I think most chambers do across the province. What could this group do? What can our businesses do? And what can the Ontario Chamber do to make sure this is front and center?
Well, yeah, I mean, the line I've been using is, it's going to get rough and Ontario has to get buff, right? And I think that's just a reality, right? And so I think, we've got so many advantages, right? We have so many opportunities, but we do have to take this very seriously. And I think that, we need to push our governments and to ensure that we're getting these long-term investments in those areas that we've been talking about today, right? In workforce development, in infrastructure, in healthy, sustainable communities, right? And of course, ensuring that we have, competitive business and tax and regulation and all those things that are important when businesses are making decisions to set up here, right? But I also think that there's a role for chambers in marketing the quality of investment opportunities that we have here in Canada, right? And right now, I think we need to be triaging our manufacturing base in particular, but not just manufacturing, but every trade-sensitive sector, and trying to understand who's going to be most at risk if there are tariffs, and how can we provide support to them, right? And I'm thinking particularly about smaller manufacturers, right? So these are areas where we need to be really good advocates, right? Because if we can preserve those manufacturing footprints, well, there's something to build on for many years to come, right? And if we can also play a role in attracting international investment and showing the value of investing in these communities where they have things that businesses need, right? We have a healthcare advantage, right? We have an educational advantage over the U.S. We have a relative public safety advantage, right? So we need to be marketing these things.
Okay, giving you 45 seconds, that's it. Final question, what would be, the takeaway for this group, for those that are watching online or someone that watches this and sees your summation of the morning, what would be the couple of things that you would want this group and anyone that's watched this discussion take away from today's discussion?
Well, I guess if there's one thing, and again, I'm just looking around at all the folks here, and just to come back to where I started, right? How inspiring it is and how important it is that we work in partnership, right? That we have business and labor, that we have nonprofits and academia, right? Community stakeholders working together, right? Because when we do that, something magic happens, right? First, it enables us to support businesses and workers, which is job one, right? With analysis and education and information and training and resources, right, that can help them be more competitive at a time when it's urgently needed. Second, it gives us the opportunity to work together on advocacy, right? Because the thing about the Chamber, which I think which makes me so excited to be part of this movement, is that we don't just represent big business, we don't just represent small business, we represent all business. Not just all business, but all business in every sector, of every size, and in every community in Ontario, right? And so when we take that advantage and we layer onto it the opportunity to work with nonprofits and academics and municipal governments and others, we become a movement that is incredibly wise to heed and incredibly difficult to ignore, right? And the final thing I'd say is it's an opportunity for leadership, right? Because I think at our best, working together, it's not just about sharing charts and graphs as we have today, telling you about the needs of business today, but it's also about looking a little ahead and thinking about the needs of businesses and workers and communities tomorrow. And in some ways, the opportunity for leadership is the most exciting of all.
Listen, we'll leave it there. Thanks, Dan, for joining us today on Between the Ferns. I really appreciate you making time for us today.
My pleasure. Thank you very much. Great to see everybody.
You're always generous with your time and make time for Greg, myself, and Chambers right across the province. So we do appreciate you taking some of your valuable time and sharing it with us today. Hang tight just as I close today's session. Once again, to our partners and sponsors, our title sponsor, the Immigration Partnership of Waterloo Region, our event sponsors, Serco Canada Inc., and the Workforce Planning Board of Waterloo Region. Waterloo, Wellington, Dufferin. Someone put region in here. That's incorrect. I know that. I got it right now. And our production sponsor, Good Coat Productions. And thanks once again to our host venue, the Doubletree by Hilton here in Kitchener, for your hospitality this morning. And of course, a special thanks to all of you for attending today in person and online, and for your continued support in helping make these events possible. Hope everyone has a great day.